You're listening to the Lightforge podcast, the key to unlocking your arena success. I'm Adwikta, ADWCTA, and I'm here with my co host, Merps.
Hey guys, this is Merps coming at you for week 4 of the Lightforge podcast, and we are officially in the TGT meta. How does it feel?
The TGT meta feels absolutely ridiculous right now because I have no idea what's going on half the time. But we'll talk about that later. I have way bigger news right now, and that is that if you can't hear this, Merps no longer sounds like a robot today because we have got him a new mic, and we not only did we get him the new mic, he has plugged it in, and it is now turned on and broadcasting sound.
Yeah, hopefully this is much better, although knowing our luck, something will get messed up, and we'll just go week to week, and this will be as part of the podcast, just like Deep Fried Meta.
Yeah. Okay. So one more thing before we go on to TGT is that we're the number 2 search podcast. Like if you search Hearthstone in iTunes, we're number 2 after the Angry Chicken now already, and so we're really happy about that. And we're also on Stitcher. If you guys are watching this live or on YouTube, and you use Stitcher, we're on there now too. So thank you guys for all of your support so far. This has really kicked off a lot faster than we expected, and we're doing what we can here with the audio to get things on track with some of the more professionally done podcasts out there. So we're getting there. But back to TGT. What is happening with the meta? Why don't you start off with what you see in the meta and how it is affecting your gameplay?
Well, the meta has gotten slower. We talked about, even before TGT came out, how the meta was going to slow down. And you are absolutely correct. It slowed down a ton. It's so common for games to reach into turn 14, turn 15, and beyond. It's getting much harder to draft those aggressive tempo decks. And not only that, you're more incentivized to draft those big, beefy minions, starting from Pit Fighter all the way to
Because they're
North Sea
so
Kraken.
good.
They are really good. Best card in the game. Well, not best card in the game, but really freaking good. So yeah, you're drafting those cards, and the meta has slowed down significantly. And I have to reluctantly agree. As for right now, because the meta can still change, you are so far the winner of our argument.
All right, Team Adwicta wins. It's official. I don't care where the meta changes. The Team Adwicta has already won, and we will not concede the throne. No, but it's true. It's week 1 of the meta. It can really change after this. Week 1 of the GVG meta, for example, was pretty much nothing like 1 month into GVG. You have some of the same principles holding true, but it was much more aggressive than 1 month later, and crazy things were happening. So who knows what's going to happen in the next 3 weeks? But as of now, the meta is indeed slower. I'd say it's about maybe even 2 turns slower. I think it may have kind of hit my projections of just how slow it was going to be. And we have stats to back a lot of this up because we can access Hearth Arena's win rate stats for people. And the Kraken is actually more than deserving of its spot. I had said before that I wanted rated a 90. By the stats, it should be a 92. That's how good the Kraken has
Yeah.
been in the early going. Now we're not going to move it, immediately. We're not going to be rash about this kind of stuff. But with a very large sample size of something like 20,000 Krakens seen, it's just been an amazing card, outperforming pretty much everything, and it has no RNG element to it either. And that's because whereas the main concern with the Kraken was that it would not get played in a game. You would have it in your hand, and the game's decided before you can play it. The game is rarely decided now before turn 9. I would say very, very rare will you get into a game where that's happening.
Yeah, definitely. That was my main fear when we had the argument last week. I was saying the turn 9 card, and even though it has such good value in the current meta, and by current I meant the BRM meta, turn 9 was just too slow. And our main disagreement was how slow the meta was going to be. So either I was going to be completely correct or you were going to be completely correct. There was no middle ground, right? And
Yeah.
you were right on that. And the meta can still change. You stated that as well. And I totally agree. Just because right now people might be playing more cautiously because they're just unsure of exactly what I should be playing around. What exactly is capable at 4 mana? What is capable at 8 mana? What's capable at 10 mana? When the meta is established, people really know. And right now, it's just unsure.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not like I think all three cards that we had discussed last time, which is like Elemental Destruction, the Kraken, and what was the other? And Ball of Spiders. We haven't really looked closely at Ball of Spiders yet, but at least for the other two, we looked at the stats and I have come out ahead. But that doesn't mean I'm right about everything. One of the big bets that I made on a neutral card going in was that Argent Horse Rider was not going to be a good card. That's wrong. It's a good card. I've used it. It's been used against me. It's just a good card. There's no need to even look at the stats to know that it's a good card, and the class stats say it's a pretty good card. Yeah, so it's going to end up hanging in there. We're going to adjust it over the weekend in terms of the tier list so that it goes to something in the high 60s. I think that's probably a fair rating for it. And Silent Knight is currently underperforming a little to its lofty rating, but not by that much. And we think people are not using it correctly necessarily at this point because it's a new card and it's a little bit more tricky than some of the other ones. So we're going to lower it a tiny bit, but not by too much. Do you want to
Yeah, I
talk
think it's
about?
important.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. I think it's important to realize that we are really just a week into the new meta. And it's easy for people to get excited because I think we've changed the game a little bit in terms of Hearth Arena stats come out. We affect the meta in terms of our tier list, and also people are showing a lot more interest in the arena and kind of min maxing their games and also trying to really pinpoint the exact tier score, which is awesome because we really want people to think about this stuff, to really analyze arena at a high level, but at the same time we don't want to be too eager, and also we don't want to take too much away from an unstable meta just a week into it with probably a lot of people still playing constructed because they want to mess around with their new toys in constructed.
Yeah, yeah. It's totally right. Why don't we move on to the Inspire mechanic? Inspire it is one of the keys to how this meta is currently working. And one of the things I want to start talking about with Inspire is how it provides card advantage. Uh, the big one is Murloc Knight. I think everybody realized that pretty much everybody got Murloc Knight wrong. No one came out and said Murloc Knight is the best card ever. People said it was good. People said it was okay. People said it was bad. No one said it was the best card ever, and it really is the best card ever. The stats confirm it. We've played with it. It seems like a really good card. I think right now it may be even more powerful in the arena than it would be in about 3 weeks from now because no one really, but a lot of people don't know how to play around the Murloc Knight when it should be really obvious, right? Like if you're playing against a Paladin, you save a removal for if the Murloc Knight gets played because otherwise you lose the game. And people aren't doing that because that's not something you would normally do to a paladin. A paladin never had a card that you would get played and would change the game like that in late game. They're worried about Guardian of Kings healing, but they're not worried about the Murloc Knight. Now that we are going to all be worried about the Murloc Knight, this strategy will kind of come into prominence, and then the Murloc Knight will be a little less good, but it'll still be really great. So we've already preemptively kind of moved it up like 10 points or something. But that goes to what the Inspire mechanic does to the meta, right? It provides infinite card advantage. If you have a Kodo Rider, if you have a Murloc Knight, if you have a Kvaldir Raider, especially with Priest, but also with other classes, and even to some extent a Silverhand Regent, you're always going to get additional stuff on the board every turn in addition to your hero power, and that alters the kind of the flow. Whereas normally, if you run out of cards, you're top decking. Now, if you run out of cards, and one of the last cards you play that you can get to stick on the board is an Inspire card, you will snowball very quickly from that position. Oh, and King Mukla, not King Mukla, Mukla's Champion, also a huge snowball card. So these things all kind of come together, and you just need one card. You just need one of those cards to play in the late game, and you have changed the late game entirely.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is you have all of these new creatures that I wouldn't necessarily say demand removal, but you are incentivized to remove them with the dilution of cards with initiative, spells, fireballs, frostbolts, just dark bombs, those kind of spells. and damage spells with initiative. So you're diluting that pool. You're adding all of these cards, Mukla's Champion, Murloc Knight, and with that, you are constantly being pressured. You remove the Mukla's Champion, they put down the Murloc Knight. You have to have a second removal, and then there are all of these Inspire cards. Kvaldir Raider is also a good example. And the average deck will just have more Inspire cards than the opponent will have removals, unless they get pretty
Mhm.
lucky. So this
Yep.
also slows down the game, but it just puts so much pressure, and it just makes Inspire really good.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. It's one of the central keys to understanding the meta right now. Or if you're wondering why you're not performing well in this meta, unless you just can't slow down by 2 turns, which, if you're a super tempo player, you may have difficulty switching decks over to a more card advantage style, and those decks are going to be drafted much more often now. So you may be suffering because of that. But the biggest reason for not adjusting to the meta, I think, would probably be that you're prioritizing your opponent's Inspire cards and you're prioritizing when you play your Inspire cards differently. Uh, to adjust to the new meta, you have to holding back that one small removal, that one spot removal is more important than ever now. And to deal with your opponent's Inspire, and at the same time, holding your Inspire cards until the very end, sometimes even when you could play it for tempo, sometimes, depending, becomes one of those considerations that you never had to make before. Because an Inspire card on the board that gets removed in 1 turn is and an Inspire card that sticks on the board for 3 turns is game ending.
Yeah, going back a little bit to what you said, I think people will adjust to playing around Inspire cards. I think the example from way back when was the when Haunted Creeper first came out. And we remember that Haunted Creeper was so unique at that point because no other 2-drop did what Haunted Creeper does, which is give you 3 really small sticky bodies on turn 2. 2-drops back then were all very solid, just either 2 3s or 3 2s. The win rate that we saw from Haunted Creeper rose extremely high. No one knew how to deal with it. And then as people got
Mm-hmm.
more used to it, the win rate of Haunted Creeper went down, and then
Yeah.
it shot back up again once we went to a tempo meta. But I think that's a great example of people not knowing how to play around a card. And Haunted Creeper is just a 2-drop. There's no crazy combos going on in turn 2. So it's just a 2-drop, but people are so not used to playing around a different card that the win rate of that card becomes extremely high. People get used to it, goes down, and then it just kind of goes into the overall meta pool, right? Where a card like Haunted Creeper will go up if the game goes faster. It might go down a little bit if it goes slower, but it just it goes back into the main pool again. And I think Murloc Knight and some of these Inspire cards might go back into the pool. Not to say they're going to be bad, but they might not be as OP as the stats show that they are right now.
Yeah. It'll definitely level off at some point. And right now, the only stats we can see are also from just all players because the amount of infinite players that have played um, has been small compared to all the other people that are playing. So when the infinite stats like really get a good sample size, I think we'll also see a different picture to some of these cards. Not necessarily in one direction in particular, but just like I remember back when Haunted Creeper came out, right? That was in the always remove everything meta, right? Your opponent plays a thing, you remove it with your minions or with a spell. That's just what had to be done because if your opponent kept it on the board, it's going to get Dark Iron Dwarfed, it's going to get Shatter Sun Cleric, and you're going to lose a whole card from it. You're not going to have any way to recover after that. So that's where everyone's mentality was until you get a Haunted Creeper, which one you probably can't remove fully, and two, even if you could, it's not necessarily a bad idea. If you just kill the first body, it gets more attack rather than less, for that matter. So, Inspire kind of has that mentality to it, where there's never been an engine on the board that can continuously generate card advantage. Uh, the closest we've probably come to that was Imp Master, and even that is a little iffy. And the size that it's of it growing is not the same as some of these like Valdir Raiders and the Kodo Riders and the Murloc Knights that we see now. And even with the Cavaldier Raider, we've never seen anything like that before. People think it's a floating watcher. Yeah, it's a floating watcher for Warlock. But Warlock has a natural limit on its hero power, which is its health pool. Other classes don't. You can just hero power every turn. And Priest can even heal it back up after it attacks. But anyway, let's
Yeah,
oh yeah, so with this new
with the
audio,
Inspire,
Merps is coming in like 2 seconds slower on my mic, so I can't we're gonna have a little bit talking into each other.
let's just admit that we're super awkward. I don't think we should be afraid to admit that. But anyways, more so about your point. Yeah, I think a lot of people dismissed, not dismissed. I think people thought that Cavaldi or Raider was going to be good, but maybe not as good as it is right now because they looked at Folding Watcher and they said, "Oh man, there's a card that's exactly the same right now, and it's even a demon, so it can get called out by Voidcaller, and it's not that great. So Cavaldi or Raider should be worse." And I gotta admit, I thought the same way too. But if you just look at the way that other heroes operate, drawing a card is great. You grab another card, but it does nothing on the board. The opportunity to give your guy +2/+2 stats affect the board as well, and also keep pressure up from your other cards. And if you have another Inspire card on there, then your Pure Power automatically is just not even anti-tempo sometimes, and that's just
Yeah.
extremely powerful and slows down the game and basically tells your opponent
Mhm.
you got to start removing unless you can kill me in the next 2 turns or else I just win.
Yep. Let's move on to jousting, the other mechanic introduced. I think I've always said that I absolutely hate jousting. It's the worst form of RNG. It's either a good card if you win the RNG, or it's a bad card if you don't win the RNG, and it's the truth. Anywhere you play it with all these cards, there's no like skill in playing it in the right place. It's just and the RNG is also like designed to not favor you. So it's even worse for good players because if you have an RNG that's really polarized, right? Like you have it 90% of the time and 10% you don't. That's better than if you have an RNG that's really close to 50-50 when it comes to good player, because then you can play it in spots and you can kind of make this assumption and you'll get rewarded more often than not. When it's at 50-50, there's just not much you can do with it. And that's where jousting always is. It's at around like 40, I think 2 or 43 on an average arena deck in terms of chances of winning the joust. And I've never won a joust. Okay, I've won like 1 or 2 jousts, but I pretty much never win jousts. So I'm way below that 40 something percent mark, which doesn't really help my evaluation of what joust does. What are your experiences with joust?
See, you're just a negative Nancy because I love jousting. I think it is extremely fun. Now, this is not to say I'll come back next week after losing 9 out of 10 Joust and say that Joust is the worst mechanic in the game. But as for now, I'm having a lot of fun with Joust. And I think a lot of the cards are the right amount of RNG. I think a lot of people really tend to look at that fine line. People were complaining about it when GVG first came out as well. We have introduction of things like Matter Bomber, Flame Cannon, Bomb Lobber, and people were thinking, "Oh, is this too much RNG?" And you can debate that for GVG. I think jousting is at that line where sometimes you get a little bit angry and sometimes you just think it's really fun. I think they are straddling the line very well, and it is just really fun to play your Master Jouster, see if you get the Divine Shield and the taunt. And sometimes you'll win, sometimes you'll lose, but that's Hearthstone for you. And King's Elec, that thing is a ridiculous card. So for most, I think the only card in which I don't like jousting, and we talked about this before, is the Armored Warhorse because charge is the core of that card. If you don't have charge, then you have nothing. At least for the Master Jouster, you get a 5/6 body, which is pretty good on turn 6. So the Armored Warhorse, I think that's not a great design, but the other cards, I'm just
Yeah,
having a lot of
it's
fun right now.
the bigger the joust effect is, the worse the card is, because the bigger the RNG effect is. That's going to be like a staple, right? If you have a joust that adds like a meaningless thing, like a spell damage or something, no one's gonna care. But otherwise, the reason Warhorse is so bad is because you can't plan it. You can never plan to win a joust. You can never plan to lose a joust. You can just put it out and hope for the best. So you either win the game right there or you lose the game right there. It's not that bad, but you either fall really far behind or you gain like a very significant advantage. Even the Master Jouster, that's a pretty important Divine Shield. That's a pretty big important taunt if you're trying to play it for the taunt effect. But now you're just evaluating like near 50% odds, and it's not good for a skilled playing, and I don't think it's even fun. I don't see what's fun with losing all of your jousts. I mean, sorry, I don't see what's fun with joust having a set effect on the board that you know what it's coming, right? What's fun? Unstable portal is fun because you don't know what you're gonna get, right? Web spinners are fun, and bombers are so fun. I love bombers. They're all RNG, but they're fun because they can do crazy things. What's not fun is if you know what is going to freaking happen. Even King's Elec is fun because you pick the card that wins the joust, right? So you don't really know what cards you're going to get, and the joust affects the card. The other jousts don't mean anything. It kind of gives you this little bit of knowledge advantage where you kind of know your opponent has this card coming up in his deck. And I did have a Dr. Boom deck where Dr. Boom got jousted out a couple times, and I was always like, no, now he knows I have a Dr. Boom. But generally, it's
Yeah.
not a skill thing. It's not a, I don't even think it's that fun of a thing.
Yeah, I think it's different to kind of differentiate between Joust and all the other RNG effects that you talked about. For an RNG effect like Web Spinner, you put it out there. So what are the knowns? You know you're going to get a 1/1, which is really good for 1 mana that spawns a beast. The beast is completely random, but the effect that you want, which is the annoying body out there and the guaranteed beast that you get after it dies, that's not
Mm,
RNG. So you
yep.
already extract a lot of constant from the uh, overall card. So only a small percentage of it is actually RNG, although you may think a lot of it is RNG. But with the important stuff you've already gotten, something like a Matter Bomber, you not only can control when you play it. What happens a lot is you can set up the board, right? Not only do you set up the board, you have 6 coin flips, and those 6 coin flips will make the average a lot more friendly to skilled players than just a 1 50-50 coin flip. And
Hmm.
I can see why you're frustrated because jousting is just you do nothing, you don't impact the board with the
Yup.
card, and then you just flip a coin to see whether or not the card is more powerful.
Yep. And I like flipping coins. I just don't like flipping one coin for everything when there's a whole rest of the game going on. But let's get off jousting. I don't want to talk about jousting. I just want to pretend jousting doesn't exist in the arena. The big question, people ask this a lot, and I think people have different responses to it, but has the meta gotten more difficult or has it gotten easier as an infinite player?
I think it's stayed the same. I don't think it's changed very much. I haven't played that much TGT since it has come out, but I've played a fair number of runs and I've been watching other streams as well. I don't think there has been a huge influx of new players or just inexperienced arena players coming back. I think that they're kind of tinkering around and constructed if they have come back. And I do see people playing a bit more cautiously in the arena. People are a little bit unsure
Hmm.
of what the new cards are, they're unsure of what you're capable of. And I think games are very long, partly because of that reason. You have pretty good players who are a little bit afraid to YOLO, as they should. And what ends up happening is you get similar difficulty games, but just long, really long games.
Yeah, and I think the variance in difficulty is huge right now because I'll see way more games against people who have no idea what they're doing. And then I'll also see games where they have mastered TGT beyond what I have mastered TGT, either because they played more than I have or because they're just getting it better than I'm getting it right now. And so I very rarely go into a game and I feel like I'm outplayed. But that has definitely happened at a higher percentage in TGT than before TGT. And it'll just take a little bit of time for me to catch up. But this also happened, I think, when GVG came out, where GVG came out, and I think in the first like 2 days, I thought the meta was so soft, and then all of a sudden the meta got really hard as everyone adjusted to GVG. I think better than I did. So I'm like really on the lookout here for like how to adjust to TGT in a good way. Um, and maybe it'll happen again. This should be the softest. Like what I'm scared about is that this should be the soft part of the meta. TGT just came out. People should be playing. But I guess you're right in that TGT's focus has really been on constructed, right? Uh, Even Crip, who is a huge arena player, has gone out and started playing constructed much more because TGT's come down. Uh, and I think he's not alone in terms of how he's thinking about it. A lot of people think that this is just a more exciting expansion for constructed if you're both a constructed and arena player. And so you may poke around in the arena, but you're going to focus on constructed right now. And it's kind of a cost-free way to get into the meta right now with constructed because it's just one stub week at the end, and really the real TGT season is going to begin next month. And so you want to really get yourself ready for it if that's what you're doing.
Yeah, I think the most important thing to remember is in GVG, they released it in the arena first. They released
Yeah.
all the
Oh,
new
that's
cards
true
in the arena
too.
first. So with arena, everyone started playing arena, and arena had momentum as well. So it kept up after GVG was released for constructed. And of course, there's going to be players who got their free arena entry and didn't use it until a couple of days afterwards. So we had this huge influx of free arena entries and these free packs as well. There were a lot more freebies from Blizzard during GVG, and that's why we saw this extremely easy meta for the first week or two of GVG. And because we're missing these freebies, we don't see it in TGT. But we should see the meta changing a little bit. And I totally agree. I see some very strong players in the arena right now. And I think the main difference is they just know how to deal with Inspire cards. They kind of
Yeah,
have a
exactly.
feel for how many, yeah, for how many Inspires this deck has, and the priority of certain Inspire cards. For example, how important is it to remove a Silverhand Regent? How important is it
Hmm.
to remove a Muko's Champion? Obviously, Muko's Champion is more important, but a lot of games are just won and lost by 1 HP or 1 attack, and you have to really know the percentages there. And some people have a good grasp of it. Right now, I do not.
Yeah, yeah, and they also have a good grasp of how to play the Inspire cards, right? Of what spots to play it in. I'm still trying to feel out when the best time to play the Cavaldia Raider is versus when the best time to play the Maiden of the Lake is versus when the best time to play a Silverhand Regent is. Uh, it's it's not the easiest thing to intuit. Obviously, later is better, but then you're sacrificing tempo, and there's that sweet the good line of when you're supposed to play it, and you get closer to it each time you bump around. So we'll get there. But I like your if you that is a really good point. I hadn't thought about the fact that GVG was arena centric in that the release was arena first, not brawl first, and people were playing more arena because of that. And new players may have just gotten the free arena and just kept playing arena rather than go back to constructed. So hopefully that means there's not a incoming difficulty rise in the next week because that would not make me very happy.
We'll see. This is something that we'll just have to keep on playing, and we'll see.
All right. So the okay, I guess we're good with the difficulty discussion. One pro tip that I've noticed, I don't know, you guys probably have as well, but if you have, I've always had this mental counter. This is not in Hearth. Well, this is kind of in Hearth Arena, um, but this is one of the features of Hearth Arena. But it's something that I have done since Classic, which is I count the number of big drops and big removals that are in my deck as a gauge for how late my deck can go to and still survive. Now, that way of thinking is a little outdated with Inspire because any Inspire card could be the biggest card in terms of card advantage, right? It's like a card that reads "Get more stuff always."
Yep.
But even beyond the ability, the presence of Inspire cards, just for normal cards, I found that I now need about 1.5 more than I used to just to win that card advantage game. Like before, I thought 6 was the average. And so if you had 6 cards that were bigger than a Yeti, you were going to win the late game as often as you're going to lose it. Now, if you have 6 big things bigger than a Yeti, you're just going to lose the late game. Your deck is too thin. You're not going to survive if you are top decking compared to your opponent. On the other hand, if you have like 7, a little more than 7, now you're at around like a 50%. And if you have like 9, that's what I need now to feel comfortable that I'm going to actually be able to win a top deck war. And that's a huge change, right? That's 3 extra cards that you have to like, or I guess if 6, I felt 50-50, maybe 7, I felt safe. So that's 2 extra cards in your deck that you have to allocate to putting out big stuff. And fortunately, because of the way dilution works, that's coming at the expense of like utility spells and things like that. So it's not coming at the cost of your curve, which it can't come at the cost of your curve. Nothing can come at the cost of your curve. But that's one of the reasons why the meta is changing the way it has. It's adding big stuff, and in order to make room for the big stuff, it's taking away the things you don't absolutely need. Right? Your curve is like 20 cards.
So, do you think it's harder to draft I won't say a perfect deck, but a good deck for Arena because you're taking away those, uh, like you say, utility cards, but you're basically saying that you need more because those utility cards can sometimes fill in the gap, or sometimes you just don't care about it. So if before you had 24 cards that you drafted that mattered, now do you need 27 cards that actually matter? So does it make your draft more difficult?
It does make your draft more difficult, and I think because one of the things that makes every single, unless you start just making really stupidly normal cards, every single expansion that comes out is going to make RPS rock paper scissors worse, as decks counter each other. And Arena accounts for that somewhat by like forcing you to pick certain types of cards, but with the dilution effect in place, with the fact that you have to make new cards do different fancy stuff, what's going to happen is more different types of decks counter other types of decks. And what's happening now is that this more very control heavy kind of deck is now viable, whereas it wasn't viable before. Before, the only viable control heavy decks are decks where you flame strike a lot, or you swipe a lot. Now there's a new, like, Hearth Arena calls it the attrition deck, right? Yeah, if you're using Hearth Arena, you're seeing a lot more attrition decks be drafted, which is to say you used to see one out of every like 50, 60 decks, maybe even more than that. And now you'll see it like one out of every 10 decks. That's because attrition is a viable model now. You just have a bigger deck than your opponent, and that's okay. So that just adds one more piece to the rock, paper, scissors battle. And it's a piece that's not favorable to mid range decks. So I think mid range decks right now are at their least efficient. We talked about it before, right?
Yeah,
Where tempo or aggro and like aggro control is not going to be hurt by slower meta. What is going to be hurt are these like slower tempo decks and mid range decks.
yeah, mid-range decks in classic mid-range decks were the way to go. And mid-range decks are really powerful just because they capitalize on that small window in which they gain a little bit of advantage, a little bit of advantage, and by turn 8 or turn 9, yeah, that small advantage every turn has turned into a big advantage. The problem with mid range now is that you still need to gain all those small advantages every single turn. And because of card dilution and with all the introduction of new cards, new ways your opponent can respond, and difficulty in getting that perfect curve, it's really tough for you to gain those small advantages every single turn. It's much easier to just go with an overall attrition strategy of saying, I just have these really big cards and I don't need to
Mhm.
play perfectly every single turn. I can just plop down this huge 6 or this huge 7 drop and force you to have that hex, force you to have that
Yep.
polymorph in order to win.
And you won't
And with
because of
percentages,
dilution.
yeah, exactly. So I think that's really important. And this is something I didn't think that we would see after Classic so much because with the introduction of every expansion, it makes it really hard to play in this sort of non-tempo-ish way. And I thought we would just keep on moving to more and more tempo. And we definitely have made a step back and the meta has slowed down a little bit, but we're going to see the same problem again as more and more expansions come out, just because of the difficulty in predicting what someone can do on turn 8. We're going to get
Yep.
crazier combos. You are not going to know at all what someone is capable of doing with 5 cards and 10 mana after a couple more expansions. Right now, I'm unsure because the meta is unsettled. I'm pretty sure I'll figure it out in a couple of weeks, but in Classic, you know exactly what's going to happen. After a few more expansions, you're a little bit unsure with cards like Light Bomb and with crazy combos like Hobgoblin as well. And now you have even crazier Inspire mechanics, and a
Yeah.
lot more
I
stuff
think
can
that
happen with a lot of
crazy
mana and a lot of
inspire
cards.
mechanics is such a big deal. Um, just because it changes the shape of what's on the board. Just adding more minions doesn't
Yep.
do anything. You can just, one big minion is the same as another big minion. Yeah, they're going to slow your deck down if they're good, but that's what's going to happen. One removal is the same as another removal. So when you have these tricky cards, it gets hard to prepare for that kind of stuff. And you're right, it's going to. Blizzard's obviously going to head in that direction of making more cards like that because they have to, because there's no other design space available. Okay, so what is happening with the question of the goat today? What does the goat want to ask us?
Well, I think the GOAT wants to ask us, out of all the new cards, what is your favorite? audio file or battle cry or whatever that from TGT.
Hmm. My favorite
'Cause I have
battle
mine.
cry, whatever. Oh, like an audio file. Okay. Okay, this is my favorite.
Yes.
And you guys will know this if you watch the stream, you'll know this in a much more intimate way in a week or two. It's the Kodo Rider. And as soon as it comes out, he says, "Let's get moving." Love it. Love it
That
every
was
time.
terrible. That was terrible.
It's as
No,
good as
my
I can
favorite is
do.
definitely my favorite is definitely Tusker Jouster. That thing just sounds so derpy. I like its attack cry or attack sound, which is turtle power. That thing is awesome. I can never get enough of it. That card is not very good, and I had it in a deck once. I think I lost
It's
every single one to
okay.
Joust, but
It's
it's fine.
okay.
It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that was the goat. Um, card good bad. The next segment is card good bad, where we tell you whether a card is good or bad. And we picked for the first TGT card to come out the absolute most interesting card TGT released from any class, and it happens to be a neutral card. And I love this card because what it shows about how the game is played. I think if you understand Coliseum Manager, which is this card, now that I've revealed it in the middle of a sentence, uh, man, I totally screwed that up. Coliseum Manager, it's just so tricky to understand. And looking at the stats that we have from Hearth Arena, because we rate this very highly, so people are picking it a lot in Hearth Arena. And people are screwing up with it hardcore. This is one of the worst cards in TGT. One of the like bottom 10 cards released by TGT that people have actually picked if you were to go purely by the stats. And this is one more reason why one, we don't trust stats yet, because the sample size, it's big for certain cards, but it can still swing. Two, the meta hasn't solidified. People don't really know how to use these cards. And three, the only stats that we can really get reliable sample sizes for right now are from all players. And if you just change this to infinite players, you already see that they're doing a little better with this.
Yeah, this is a card in which there's no easy way for me to say this. You guys got to shape up, okay? You guys got to use this card better because
All
there's no
arena
way it is.
players.
It's terrible right now. Looking at the stats, it is shameful. It should never be close to eye for an eye, or it should never be close to bolster. And right now, it is not that far away from those cards. But I think a lot of people are just misusing it. Either they honestly just forget how to use it, and if you misplay with this card, it's huge. You lose so much tempo by taking it back into your hand. And also, you want to make sure that you plan out your turns. And this is something that some players are not great at doing as well. You put it down, and you next turn, you have to say to yourself, am I forced to hero power next turn? What can my opponent possibly play? Can I kill off the Coliseum Manager? Or maybe can I just use it to good advantage, get it down to 1 HP, and then bring it back into my hand? In which case, it doesn't matter anyways. A 2-1 on the board is sometimes, it doesn't matter at all. But I think some people are not planning out their turns. Some people might just be making a mistake, period. But everyone who drafts Coliseum Manager, draft it with confidence. Just make sure you use it correctly.
Yeah. And it depends heavily on your class when you use it, right? Like if you're a mage, try your hardest to not use it on turn three. In fact, just try to pretend it's not even a 3-drop if you're a mage, because once you put it down, your opponent can screw with you so hard by trying to put you in situations where you really should be pinging. And on the other hand, if you're playing like a hunter, it's a great turn three play because you're never going to be incentivized to use your hero power that early. And this questionable, but if definitely if you're in a top deck situation, the Coliseum Manager's downside Inspire ability turns into an upside. You can hit something for 2 damage and get it back and still play it with whatever cards you draw most likely, because you still have 5 mana left over. So yeah, there's definitely good ways to play this card. It is not as good in Mage, just because you can ping it. I mean, it does lock out your ping. But people, I think one of the big mistakes people make is that they treat it as a really good 3-drop, so they want to drop it down immediately. Well, if you're going to drop it down immediately, make sure there's nothing your opponent can do that would make you want to then ping the next turn, because it takes you at least 2 turns to kill off the Colosseum Manager as 5 health. And even then, you may have to kill it off in an inefficient manner that you don't want to.
Yep. Or just play Warrior and be very happy that
Best
you have a
card.
Colosseum Manager. You're never
Best card
incentivized to
ever.
use your power at all.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so our final topic is class talk. We're going to talk about the Shaman because we delayed the Arena Coup last time because it was going to be kind of pointless to like try to show people how to play Shaman when the whole meta is going to change a day later. Well, now we're going to get to the Shaman. How do you think the Shaman is doing in TGT? Do you think it's good in TGT right now? Do you think it's bad? Do you think it's gotten better? What do you think about the new cards? Let's just dig really deep into the Shaman right now.
Sounds good. I think the Shaman has gotten better. The Shaman is a class that definitely benefits from a slower meta, and you can see this from the history of the Shaman. The Shaman was a pretty good class, middle of the pack in Classic when the meta was really slow. And as the meta got faster and faster, Shaman just couldn't keep up. They have good removal spells in Lightning Bolt and Force Lightning, but those were always a little bit slow because of overload. And right now, with the importance of board as well, those totems are so annoying. Totems have always been
Hmm.
very annoying if the game is slow, but the problem was that totems didn't really do anything unless you had a Flame Tongue totem or you could activate them some other way. But now, with stuff like Thunderbluff Valiant, Mookless Champion, you have more ways to activate your totems, and totems they can always taunt damage to your face. And I think the new cards for Shaman are just really good. Probably not Healing Wave because any sort of healing in the arena doesn't do anything. But I've played a few Shaman runs. I've done extremely well. Just the ability to go into turn 6 for Fire Elemental and not be 2 turns away from dying is extremely good. And if you can lengthen the games, then Shaman will overrun you with totems, and the lack of a ping becomes less important.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think Shaman. I initially predicted that Shaman was going to be one of the classes that got worse, which was very like against the grain of what other people were saying, and I was wrong. Shaman did not get worse. Shaman got better. I don't think relative to its original spot in the meta, it has changed all that much. But it's still in the middle there somewhere. And it is because slower metas generally favor Shaman. They have more triggers. Mukla is just better than I thought because I think when everyone was thinking about Inspire and how many times you get to trigger Inspire, very few people, or at least I certainly didn't, think that it was actually just going to be infinite sometimes. Like a decent number of times. It's just going to be infinite and you just lose the game. So these innocent totems on the board will actually absolutely kill you. Even with a Flame Tongue totem, you just get a certain amount of damage on the board. Even with a Thunderbolt Valiant or the Frostwolf Warlord esque totem guy. I keep forgetting his name. They still have a set amount of power that they can get, right? You
Yeah.
tap, you get a totem. It's a 2/2. You're probably going to use it to turn later, and it becomes a 4/2. No matter how long your Valiant stays alive, or you just get a flat bonus with the other card. Flame Tongue Totem gets you 2 attack per totem, which is set, and it's even lower. But Mukla just lets you have infinite value. And that really changes things. Because you think about what you had before that did something like this, right? You had a Direwolf, you had a Stormwind Champion, you had a Flame Tongue, and they all required everything to stay alive. And now you have Mukla, which doesn't require, which requires it to stay alive, but then the bonuses are permanent. And then you also have these 2 rare cards. And I guess you have Frostwolf Warlord as well. But then you have these 2 rare cards, which are class cards, so they combine to be the same as a regular neutral card. And so the dilution effect is fully overcome and then some by these new cards. So the Shaman's whole like getting totems on the board and then doing things strategy is actually kind of working right now. And another thing that I didn't consider, and that's becoming huge now that I've played the Shaman, I've played against the Shaman, is that Overload works really well with the late game. Because it's essentially a non-factor in the late game when you overload to a later turn. Your mana is really not worth that much, and on top of that, it doesn't screw with your curve the way that overloading early does. This is why Totem Golem is rated so low, right? It's because it screws with your curve. Even though it's getting the better card out earlier, it's still messing up your curve later on. But with something like Lightning Bolt, what was bad about Lightning Bolt? You couldn't use it on turn 3 because then you can't play turn 4 next time. It's like unusable. You'd rather just totem pass than use the Lightning Bolt and screw up your turn 4. When the game gets later, there are more and more chances for you to use a Lightning Bolt in a normal way, right? For you to use a Fork Lightning in a normal way. And as the game gets later, as the Shaman, you get to use that Stormforge Axe more and more without worrying about your face. Stormforge Axe took a big hit when GVG came out, even though it was in theory really good at removing little stuff. And it was just because, in addition to screwing up your curve, which is very important when you're in a tempo game, what it also did was it gave you face damage, which in Classic was a non-factor, right? You don't care how much face damage you got in the beginning. And now it's starting to become a non-factor again. You're no longer caring that much how much face damage you get with weapons. And so all this stuff is just all working in the Shaman's favor. And Stormforge Axe, notoriously, right? It has 3 charges, one of the few weapons that has that many charges, and it deals very little damage. So after the first one that removes the 3/2, your next one's maybe hitting pretty big things.
Yeah. One other consideration when talking about these Inspire cards, I don't think we mentioned this previously. It was something that I didn't think about before TGT came out, and that was how late game Inspire cards would be better than I expected because because of the lack of removals and because of early game Inspires. Early game Inspires and early game just kind of other cards force your opponent to use their limited amounts of removal to remove them first. So I always thought that late game Inspire cards would be a little bit slow, but because people have less removal now, if you just play on curve and apply pressure in the early turns, you basically force your opponent to either remove right then to keep up if they have it, or to maybe perhaps fall behind a little. And a lot of people right now are choosing to remove immediately. And that might be the wrong move, but I see lots of people just remove immediately because that's how you played in BRM. You remove the current threat, you force your opponent to have something else. And what ends up happening is when you put down the Thunderbluff Valiant on turn 7, when you put down the Kodo Rider on turn 8, when you put these down, your opponent, you've already forced your opponent to play the removals. And most people do play those early removals. They play that and then they run out of removals for your win condition, which is your Thunderbluff Valiant or your Kodo Rider.
I completely agree. So Shaman ends up being in a pretty decent place as it turns out, and we'll hopefully do well with it in our next game. And that's the end of the Light Forge. Let's talk about what's going on next week. What do we want to talk about next week? I think we're going to leave it up a little in the air because the reason we were able to have such a good discussion on Coliseum Manager was because we didn't pick a card last week. And I still think that the meta is changing enough that over the course of the week, we'll come up with like a really good card that'll really help you guys out to talk about rather than like trying to set it right now based on this current meta. Again, the meta is changing week by week right now in the arena. It's one of the few times this is going to happen. Well, actually, it's going to happen every expansion because it either has a release schedule, right, where one wing releases every week, or it's going to have a huge influx of cards. It's going to take the meta a while to adjust. But still, we're in this like fancy time in the arena, and we should enjoy it. And we'll pick the next card, good bad, in the next week. So, you have anything more to add, Merps?
Nope, this has been really fun, and unfortunately, I would say once again, I was wrong. For now, Adwicta is right, so we can just leave it at that and not mention it anymore.
One thing to know though is that even like because we did the tier list together, and if you just look at the tier list, you're going to see us make some changes, and it's going to highlight the misses, and there will be like a handful of fairly sizable misses, and that'll happen. But with a handful of really sizable misses, what that means is we got 125 cards right out of 132, right? Like that's kind of incredible, and we are patting ourselves in the back so freaking hard right now for being able to do that. We were definitely not that accurate in BRM by the same percentages, and it's hard to tell with TGT. I don't even remember how right we were back then, but this is definitely a huge success as far as we're concerned. Getting the Kraken down, like I'm so happy I pushed so hard on that card, and I'm going to be very happy when that card gets moved to a 90 eventually, as it should be for all classes besides Warlock. Although I did just get a 12-1 with a Kraken earlier this week. So yeah, anyway, guys, thanks for listening. If you are watching this on iTunes or if you're watching this on Stitcher, please give us a rating and give us a review. We want to go up, and so when people search Hearthstone, we are the second podcast that comes up. And this is important because we want Arena to really have the standing and the node the visibility that that Constructed has. And so to have this podcast, which is purely Arena and will only ever talk about Arena, be number 2 next to these general podcasts or these like ranked focus podcasts, it's going to be a huge deal. And this is something that Blizzard will take notice, and it will help out #Arena Warriors Matter. This is all stuff that Blizzard looks at. And so we still haven't been able to actually get a response from Blizzard on #Arena Warriors Matter. But if we just keep getting more notice, and it's any kind of Arena content anywhere, just make it happen. They will realize that this is something that they have to pay attention to. So thank you once again. We will hopefully have the actual intro and outro and like transition music and stuff by next time. But for now, you get me again. Enjoying the Lightforge? For a full rundown on Hearthstone Arena draft strategies, card reviews, and Arena gameplay, follow us on YouTube, Twitter, or twitch.tv at ADWCTA, or visit our website, ggogaming.com. See you next week.